Welcome to WTEW Bible Studies. So we're studying books of the Bible, but I'm taking a little break right now to catch up on a little prophecy. That's more what I'm probably my more greater expertise than different books of the Bible. The next book that we'll do is the book of Hebrews. There's a lot of interesting things in there, and but right now there's so much concern about Israel with the wars. We hear about the red heifers. There's just a lot of information that we got. So much going on over there at Israel, and people wonder where we are in end times events. If you just keep a copy of what's going on in this, I'm going to give you the whole scenario of what's going to happen in Israel. Now, it could be that we're real close to Jesus' return, but you'll know when you see these events take place. So I'm going to list some events, and if you just keep these things in mind, you won't have to panic every time something happens. Oh, the red heifer's in the news. Oh, Israel's going to war here. Oh, this country's doing this other thing. I don't want you to panic. I want you to know what the signs are before they happen. So that's what's going to happen to Israel. So there's going to be Daniel's 70th week. That's going to start on the Feast of Tabernacles. So in the Jewish year, they had 7 major feasts, and on 3 of those, the Jews, male Jews, were required to go to Jerusalem for these 3 feasts. So 3 times a year they went. We got the Passover happens in the spring, Pentecost that happens in the summertime, and then Tabernacles that happens in the fall. So that's going to be the start of Daniel's 70th week when this peace treaty starts. And that's going to be the last 7 years of Israel's punishment for rejecting God. So if we look at Daniel 9:24 to 27, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. So that's the Jews in Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So the Jews are going to accept Jesus just like Christians have. So all those things in there, except for sealing up the vision, ending these 70 weeks, all those things have to do with they're going to accept Jesus just like Christians do. So that's how they finish the transgression, make an end to sins. Jesus took away those sins. He brought in everlasting righteousness to all believers. He brought in reconciliation for iniquity. So then verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. In 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And then to the end of the war, desolations are determined. So after 69 of those 70 weeks, which are weeks of years, Messiah was cut off. He was killed in just outside of Jerusalem. He was put on that cross and died for our sins. The people, the prince that shall come, whenever you see prince like this, especially in the book of Daniel, that's the spiritual power. So there was a spiritual power or prince of the Medes and the Persians. There was a spiritual power of the Greeks, and the spiritual power when Messiah was cut off was Rome. So these are the 4 world powers. You had Babylon, Media Persia, Greece, and Rome. And they all had some spiritual authority over them. You might also hear of Gog. That's another spiritual authority that's over a specific part of the world. And so at this time, in verse 26, when he's talking about Messiah being cut off, and then the people, the prince that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, that happened in 70 AD, where Jerusalem was leveled. And when they talk about the end being with a flood, that's a flood of armies. And that's the imagery that's often used when you see this, the flood, and it's because the armies of one nation flow out of their banks and overflow and run into other nations and take care and conquer them. And then verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So this he is the prince of Rome. So this Roman power is gonna get in somebody's head, and there's going to be this covenant with many. So Israel's going to enter into a 7-year covenant, a peace agreement, a treaty with 10 nations for a period of 7 years. So there'll probably be 5 Western powers and 5 Eastern powers, because they're talked about on having on 2 feet. You got 5 toes on each foot, and the Roman Empire was split in two. It had 2 capitals eventually, where one was in Rome and the other one was in Constantinople over in Turkey. So there's going to be an Eastern side and a Western side to these 10 nations. So he's going to cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. They have a twice daily sacrifice of a lamb. That's going to stop in the middle of the 70th week. And when that happens, that's going to be the start of the Great Tribulation. And for the overspreading of abominations, he will make it desolate. So Jerusalem's going to be desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. God is actually punishing the Jews for this whole period of these 70 years. And it's going to happen until the Jews finally realize that they have a Messiah, that Jesus was their Messiah, and they missed him. But at this point, at that end of the 70th year, at the end of the 70th week, that last day, there's going to be 2 witnesses rise from the dead and ascend into heaven. At that point, they're going to realize who Jesus was, and they're going to do that mourning then. Back to the covenant, it's going to be a peace treaty between Israel, Christians, and Muslims. So we had the Abraham Accords. It's going to be similar to that. And all 3 Abrahamic groups will be able to worship on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem when they make this covenant. So the 10 nations, and right now we have a quint in the Western nations. So the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Germany. You can notice Italy is in there because it's this Prince of Rome that's going to form this. And they're going to ally with 5 Middle Eastern nations. And so Israel will be one. Saudi Arabia will likely be another one. Egypt will be one. And then the area that was formerly Seleucia will be one also, because that's where Antichrist is going to come from. So there's actually going to be 2 leaders during the 7-year period. So the first one's going to make peace, and they're going to call him the Messiah. The second one that comes up is going to be from the area of Syria and Iraq, and he's going to be the one that's going to be the Antichrist that will send the 200 million troops there in the 6th trumpet in Revelation. He's going to send those troops into Israel. So in Revelation 17:12-13, it talks about these 10 nations. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom of yet, but receive power as kings, 1 hour with the beast. So the beast is this new Roman Empire that's gonna come up. And these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So they're going to act as one nation. These 10 separate ones, they're going to act as one Roman Empire. And when they make this covenant, it's going to be opposed for 5 months in the form of the 5th trumpet. That's Revelation 9:1-12. You'll see there's these locusts from hell, if you will. And that may be symbolic. It could be, they're shooting off drones. There's tunnels all over there anymore. So these may be little drones that take off from these tunnels near Israel, and they'll release non-lethal poison gas. And the 144,000 Christians that I mentioned earlier, they won't be exposed to that, so they won't be harmed. So if you see 5 months of people just wanting to die because they're in such pain, then that will be the 5th trumpet. The first 4, by the way, have already passed, and so we don't have to look for those. So 6 months after the start of the peace covenant, the Jewish Passover sacrifice is going to be performed on the Temple Mount. So that's the twice daily lamb sacrifice, and construction on the Temple Mount will also begin. People are going to say there's peace and safety, like in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes on them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. So the first 3.5 years might look pretty good, but after that, there's going to be that great tribulation that comes upon them. I think I might have mentioned this already. The Jewish leaders will say that the person most responsible for the peace is their Messiah, although that person won't call himself Messiah. John 5:43. I am come in my Father's name, Jesus said, and you receive me not. If another come in his own name, him you will receive. So this guy doesn't even have to call himself Messiah. The Jews are going to call him Messiah. And then roughly 3 years from the start of the peace covenant, the armies of the 6th trumpet, it's 200 million cavalry, They're going to form at the Euphrates River before invading Israel, as shown in Revelation 9:13 to 21. This is also shown in Daniel 7:24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So there's already going to be this Roman Empire with 10 kings, and then another one's going to arise. So this is going to be the Antichrist who's going to take over. So 3 of those leaders of those nations are going to be replaced. Well, those nations, one of them is going to be Rome, because Rome's going to be destroyed, and that's in the book of Revelation in chapter 17. The other 2 you can see in Daniel verses 40 to 45, where he will invade Israel, so he'll take over that. He'll go all the way down and invade Egypt, so he'll have control over that. So those are the 3 kings. He's going to look to go down to the other parts of Africa, to the west into Libya, to the south Ethiopia. But tidings from the north and the east, again, this is the book of Daniel, are going to stop him. That's where this Gog and Magog invasion comes in. They're going to attack Antichrist. But instead of attacking Antichrist, and it's going to be a prosperous time for them all, these countries to the north and east, he's talking about Turkey, he's talking about Iraq, he's talking about all the stand companies up there that stand and they speak Turkish, maybe even Russia. They're going to come down and they're going to, initially their thought is they're going to attack Antichrist in these nations and take their wealth. But it turns out they all, instead of attacking one another, joined forces together. And so all these armies together are going to fight against Christ at the Battle of Armageddon. So on Passover, 3.5 years after the start of the peace covenant, 2 witnesses, which are 2 churches, because they're called candlesticks. So if you look in the early parts of the book of Revelation, you've got 7 churches are represented as 7 candlesticks. So these 2 witnesses are represented as 2 candlesticks. Therefore, they're 2 churches. And they're comprised of the 144,000 that became Christians at the start of all this. At the halfway point, again, this is the start of the Great Tribulation. These 144,000 are going to be empowered by the Holy Spirit to perform the miracles of Elijah and Moses. So they're going to make fire come down from heaven. They're going to make the rain stop. They're going to bring all kinds of different plagues, just like Moses did. Now, on Passover, what the Jews do, they leave a door open, and it's for Elijah to enter, and they set a place for him. So they expect Elijah to come on Passover. And so that's why I believe that this is all going to happen on Passover. So these are going to open, these 144,000 are going to go around that night on Passover, and they're going to enter the open doors of the homes in Israel who have a dinner plate set for Elijah. All of Israel who receive these prophets will flee from Israel in the morning when they see that the twice daily lamb sacrifice has been stopped and an abomination of desolation has been set up on the Temple Mount by the 200 million invaders of the sixth trumpet. This will be like the flight from Egypt in their exodus. The 2 witnesses and the takeover of the Temple Mount are found in Revelation 11, 1-14. This is the second half of Daniel's 70th week, the last 7 years of God's punishment on Israel. And this time is called the time of Jacob's trouble, and that's found in Jeremiah 30, 6-8. So I'll read that. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned to paleness. That's like the worst pain in the world. And when these women go through childbirth, and you can't help but groan, and there's not much else you can do. Verse 7, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So Jacob is Israel, and God's not going to completely destroy Israel. He's going to refine them as gold going through the fire. So he's going to purge them all, the people that won't believe in Messiah no matter what happens. And they're going to be killed. But the ones that remain, they're going to be in Israel, where Jesus and us, all believers in Christ, we're going to help Jesus, and we're going to rule the world from Israel at the end of that time. Verse 8, it shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. So we've had this 10 nation confederacy, which Israel was all for. They did it willingly. And then Antichrist takes them over. They entered that unwillingly. But God is going to cause that to come to a halt. And that's what's going to happen at the Passover. 3.5 years into this, he's going to do that. But at the end of the whole 7 years, God's going to get rid of all of Israel's enemies. So Satan's the spiritual force directing the 200 million troops pictured as a flood. He will try to kill those who flee, but part of his enemy will die, as did Pharaoh's armies who pursued Israel in Exodus. You can find this in Revelation 12:13-17. So we're going back to that 3.5 year mark at the Passover when Israel, those that were warned by these 144,000 to get out of town, they flee. Beginning with verse 13 in Revelation 12. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. So that's talking about Israel bringing forth Jesus when he was a man on earth in the 1st century. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half time from the face of the serpent. So the woman is Israel, 2 wings of the great eagle. That's these 2 witnesses, these 144,000, 2 churches. She's going to flee. And where's she going to flee? Well, I don't know. Most people think Jordan. And that seems like a pretty good bet to me. And this times and half a time, that's just another way of saying 3.5 years. And the serpent is Satan. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away with a flood. So Satan's going to send out these 200 million troops from the 6th trumpet, and going to try and wipe out Israel. That's been the plan all along. He's always trying to wipe out Israel. And we see people chanting that more and more these days. So when you hear those chants, know that they're coming true, but also know the order of events, that they're not going to completely wipe out Israel, but Israel is going to go through a tough time. And this flood is the flood of armies. Verse 16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So just like Israel, when they crossed the Red Sea in the Exodus, and Pharaoh and his armies drowned, well, when the Israelites cross over the river, the Jordan River there in Israel, is going to be a flood stage apparently, and Israel is going to go through it, but the armies of Satan, they're going to be killed doing this. So everybody that fled there, they'll get away, and they will be good. They'll be safe for 3.5 years while all the great tribulation is going on. Verse 17, and the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. So Satan is mad at Israel. We saw that he was going to go down. He's going to not only take over Israel, but he's also going to take over Egypt. But he's also going to make war on Christians all over the world. That's why this great tribulation is not just the time of Jacob's trouble. It's not just about Jerusalem and Israel. It's about the whole world. Wherever there's Christians, this Antichrist is going to try and kill them. In verse 16 above, that's also pictured from Jesus' point of view in Isaiah 63, 1-3. Jesus is going to come and start he's going to intervene at the point where the Jews flee and cross over the Jordan River. And who is this that comes from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth the wine fat? I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in my anger, and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. So Jesus comes here, and he protects those. These are now believers in Christ. These have been warned by those 144,000 that Jesus is their Messiah. And you got to flee when you see that abomination of desolation, that sacrifice being stopped. So that morning when they wake up, they get out of town. They cross the Jordan River, and Jesus kills those enemies just like during the Exodus. And that's why when Jesus returns, he's already stained. And he's got those blood-stained garments even before he leaves heaven. And that's because He poured out his wrath on these people that were trying to kill people that belonged to him. So this whole fleeing and great tribulation, that's shown in Matthew 24:15-22. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. So that's the Temple Mount. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountain. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then there shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So this is a worldwide great tribulation. That's how you get that. That's how it's defined right there. And verse 22, and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. The way that's shortened is God intervenes, just like he intervened at the abomination of desolation when the people of Israel flee across the Jordan River. He's going to intervene at the end of those 3.5 years of great tribulation, and he's going to make these two witnesses, those 144,000, two churches, he's going to bring them back from the dead. They're going to come to life. They're going to raise on their feet, and they're going to ascend into heaven, and everybody's going to watch them. This is not a secret thing. Everybody's going to see them go up into heaven. That's the sign of Jesus. That is going to be one of the things that's going to say Jesus is on his way. In Revelation 17:16-18, we see where he knocks out the Roman leader. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So this woman is also known as Babylon. She's the great whore. It's the world capital. So these 10 nations, Rome is going to be the capital, just like it was back in the first century. And when the Antichrist takes over, it's not going to be Rome anymore. There's going to be a different Babylon the Great. There's going to be a different city that's going to rule the world, and these 10 nations. And that also will be called Babylon the Great. So whenever you see this great whore talked about, it's not a system, it's a city. And that's the only thing that the Bible ever calls it, is a city, and it's the world capital. So in the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, that world capital was Babylon. In the time of the Medes and the Persians, it was moved. I can't think of it offhand right now. So the time of the Greeks, they had another capital. You could make the case that it moved back to Babylon. But the woman is the capital of whatever the ruling power is. So we've got, here's where Gog enters in. Other countries will originally oppose Antichrist, as shown in Daniel 11:44. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury, destroy, and utterly make away many. These countries fall under the leadership of the spiritual authority named Gog. That's in Ezekiel 38:3-6. Verse 3, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So the chief prince, again, that's the spiritual authority. Meshech and Tubal, those are areas in Turkey, some say they're in Russia. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. So Persia is going to be with them. That's Iran. So Iran's going to join Turkey and possibly Russia and those countries that end in Stan. Ethiopia and Libya are going to join them. So these are the countries that Antichrist was going to invade, but he didn't because those kings of the north and the east made him turn around. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Targama of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. This is, again, more places in Turkey. So all these going to join together. Originally, they're going to fight Antichrist, but Antichrist convinces them, no, join me. We got to fight against Christ when he comes. So the 7 years of Daniel 9, which includes the period of great tribulation, ends as God raises the two witnesses from the dead, and they ascend into heaven on the 7th anniversary of the covenant of peace, on the festival of tabernacles. Those who fled and those who survive in Israel will see the two witnesses raptured into heaven from their tabernacles. So, interestingly, when God led the people of Israel around the desert, they were in tabernacles. So they could see God. He was actually in a cloud by night and a pillar of fire by day. So in this Feast of Tabernacles, their Feast of Booths, they call it, they make their tabernacles specifically with no roof. And so without a roof, these people in their tabernacles are going to see the ascension of these two witnesses. So immediately after the tribulation of those days, this is in Matthew 24:29-30, immediately after the tribulation of those days, so the great tribulation is ended at this point, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And you'll see these signs in the sun, moon, and stars all over. And it might be called different things. But this is the time immediately after the Great Tribulation. So this is the time of God's wrath. These are 75 days. God's wrath and the Great Tribulation are not interchangeable terms. After the Great Tribulation comes God's wrath, and these are the things that are immediately going to happen at the start of God's wrath. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, that's when these two witnesses have risen into heaven. They'll be raptured. They'll be visible when they're going up. And that's when everyone mourns. They're going to mourn. They missed Jesus the first time, but now they know that Jesus is coming. He raises the dead. We don't have to worry about our lives anymore because we know that Jesus is going to raise us from the dead, even if we do die. So this hold that Satan has over people by the fear of death, he's not going to have that anymore. His power ends at this point. Jerusalem's not going to be trampled over anymore at this point. So that the last 42 months in Revelation 11, where Jerusalem's been trampled by the Gentiles ever since King Nebuchadnezzar took over in like 690 BC. So for the last 2,700 years, other countries have had some kind of rule, some kind of authority in Israel, and that's true to this day, even over Jerusalem. Jerusalem was won back by the Jews in the 1967 war, but Jordan still controls the Temple Mount. There's different quarters in there. The British control a quarter. I'm not sure who all controls different parts of Jerusalem. Israel does not have complete control over Jerusalem. But as soon as that great tribulation is over, that trampling of Israel by other nations, that comes to an end. So we mentioned God's wrath, and there's going to be mourning for 30 days. So that's day 1290, past the end of the great tribulation. We find that in Daniel 12:11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, that's that twice daily lamb sacrifice, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So that's those 3.5 years would be 1,260 days. So that's where we get 30 days of mourning for these two witnesses for Jesus after that. And the mourning of the nation of Israel is pictured in Zechariah 12:9-10. It shall come to pass in that day that I shall seek to destroy all nations that come against Israel, and I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. So right at the end of that 70th week, Israel's punishment is done. Now God's going to kill all those that came against her, and that's the period of God's wrath. You specifically see God's wrath in the seven bowl judgments. All those, that's the 7 last plagues. That's the last 7 things that are going to happen. And so at the 7th plague, that's when Jesus comes. And you can see that repeated throughout the book of Revelation. And so all the nations, again, we're going to have that great burial in Israel for all these nations that came against God. So after the mourning, there's going to be another 45 days of the wrath of the God until judgment is given to the saints of God. So here's where we get our reward. Sometime in that last part, Jesus is going to come, that 7th bowl, and Jesus and the saints from both the Old and the New Testaments will then reign over earth with Jesus from Jerusalem for 1,000 years, and that's found in Daniel 12 to 13. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So that's 75 days past the 1,260 days. Those are the 75 days of God's wrath. But go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest, and shalt stand in thy lot at the end of the days. So at the end of these 1,335 days, past that time when the sacrifice ends and the abomination of desolation stands up, Daniel's going to receive his reward, and everybody else is going to receive their reward at that time. That's you can read in Revelation 20 how the judgment is given to the saints. You can also read about that in Revelation 11, in the seventh trumpet. The judgment is going to be given to the saints. That's a repetition. That's not two different things happening. That's a repetition of the same event. You can read about God's wrath there at that same time. That's when Jesus comes. That's why some people think there's a pre-tribulation rapture. Jesus comes in the 11th trumpet, or in the 11th chapter of the book of Revelation, the seventh trumpet. It's right in the middle of the book of Revelation, so they call that mid-tribulation. That's not how the book of Revelation is. The book of Revelation is divided up into 6 different stories that all end when Jesus comes. And then there's a 7th story in chapter 20 that starts at that time when Jesus has come and talks about how he reigns on the earth and gets rid of sin for 1,000 years. So that's everything that's going to happen. Don't be surprised when it happens. Don't be worked up when you see something. Follow it along. Pray to Jesus now for his peace. Don't be caught under the circumstances of the day. Rise above it with your focus on Jesus. Thanks for listening.